You never think it'll happen to you. You don't think the system will fail your kid. Until it does. Until you come home after a double shift at the hospital, open your front door, and realize the one thing keeping your child alive is gone. Just gone. Sarah Miller wasn't the type to make noise. She was a single mom and ER nurse, and the kind of neighbor who remembered birthdays and returned your trash bins without being asked. Her world was tight, tired, and efficient, because it had to be. Her 7-year-old son Liam had a rare genetic condition. He was okay, as long as he received a very specific refrigerated medication once every 24 hours. Miss a dose? Things unraveled fast. The medication came once a month in a foam-insulated white box, covered in bold red lettering. Urgent medical delivery. Refrigerate immediately. Do not tamper. A specialty courier would place it right on her front porch between noon and 1 p.m. Sarah had a whole system. Her neighbor, Mrs. Parson, usually kept an eye out if she was working. But that day, Wednesday, Mrs. Parson had a dentist appointment. So Sarah did what she'd done every other month. She trusted the process. By 12:16 p.m., her phone pinged. Package delivered. She checked her ring cam. There it was, sitting right by the doormat. She exhaled. Normal. Except when she got home just after 5, shoes in one hand, badge still around her neck. The box was gone. No note, no sign. Her mind spiraled. Had someone stolen it? But when she checked the footage again, what she saw wasn't a thief. It was worse. And what happened next? It would light a fire in the entire neighborhood and echo through courtrooms across the country. Let us know in the comments where you're watching from, because trust me, you're going to want to weigh in on this one. At first, Sarah thought it was just another porch pirate, until she watched the footage again. And there he was, a man in a tucked-in blue polo, clipboard in hand, badge around his neck. He wasn't stealing the package. He was scanning it, and then he just picked it up and walked off. She paused the video, zoomed in. The logo on his shirt made her stomach turn. Maple Glen HOA. Not a stranger. Not a thief. This was official? She barely had time to process when an email hit her inbox at 6:19 p.m. Subject. Parcel removal. Regulation enforcement. It read like something written by a robot. In accordance with Regulation 5.3 of the Maple Glen Homeowners Association Guidelines, unattended items left on visible property surfaces for more than 30 minutes are subject to immediate removal. Your violation has been corrected. Item disposed. Her stomach dropped. Disposed? This wasn't just any box. This wasn't a newspaper or an Amazon return left out too long. This was life-saving medication for a child, clearly labeled, time-sensitive, a drug she fought for months to get approved, and that her insurance would absolutely not cover again without an avalanche of red tape. She called the HOA office immediately. Voicemail. So she stood in the middle of her kitchen, frozen. Her keys still in her hand, the smell of antiseptic still clinging to her scrubs. All she could do was stare at the spot on the porch where the package should have been, and all she could think was, they threw it away. They just threw it away. Her hands were shaking. Her throat was dry. Her little boy, Liam, was in the other room watching cartoons. He had no idea what had just happened, but Sarah did. And soon, the whole world would too. The next morning, Sarah hadn't slept. She lay in bed staring at the ceiling, listening to the low hum of the fridge. The sound now cruel. It was supposed to be holding Liam's medication. Instead, it was empty. By 8 a.m., she was gripping her coffee like it was the only thing keeping her upright. She called the HOA again. 4 rings. Then, click. This is Karen Watson. Came the voice, sharp and dry. Sarah knew that name. The HOA president. The same woman who once fined a neighbor for planting tulips that weren't community approved. She was ruthless about lawn height, porch furniture, mailbox fonts. The type who enforced rules like they were commandments. I'm calling about a package that was taken from my porch yesterday, Sarah began, trying to steady her voice. It was my son's medication. Life-saving, temperature-sensitive, and now it's gone. Karen didn't even flinch. Yes, she replied. It was in violation of Regulation 5.3, left visible for more than 30 minutes. We disposed of it per policy. Sarah blinked. Disposed. The word rattled around in her head like a warning bell. You didn't check what it was? She asked. Karen's tone grew colder. We don't open private property. That's a liability. But we're not a pharmacy either. We enforce what's visible. Sarah could barely get her words out. It was labeled in red. Medical delivery. Urgent. Refrigerate immediately. My son has a genetic disorder. Missing a dose can put him in the hospital. There was a pause, long enough to give hope, but then Karen spoke again. Calm, unbothered. You signed the HOA agreement when you bought your home. The rules apply to all residents. We cannot make exceptions for unverified personal claims. Sarah hung up, and then she cried, not because she was scared, but because she realized she wasn't just dealing with a mistake. She was dealing with a machine. By nightfall, Sarah was running on caffeine and adrenaline. She tried to hold it together, because that's what nurses do. But this wasn't triage. This wasn't someone else's child. This was Liam. At 9:03 p.m., he said his stomach hurt. Not unusual. But something in his voice, it was sluggish, like his words were fighting their way out. His skin was pale. His forehead burned against her palm. She told herself it was just fatigue, stress, maybe dehydration. But when midnight hit and Liam began vomiting, everything in her training screamed at her. His body trembled with every heave, his eyes glassy, almost not there. Her hands moved before her brain could, packing her hospital bag, scooping Liam into a blanket, carrying him to the car. The drive was only 10 minutes, but it felt like threading a needle with shaking fingers. When she pulled into the ER, the irony hit her like a brick. 12 hours earlier, she clocked out of the same building. Now she was back, not as a nurse, but as a mom in crisis. Liam was wheeled in by her colleagues. Nobody said much. They knew her. They knew Liam. One nurse, Emily, just squeezed her arm gently and whispered, "We've got him." Sarah nodded, but she couldn't speak. Inside the trauma room, wires went on Liam's chest. His blood pressure was low, heart rate erratic. Monitors beeped steadily, too steadily. And while her son lay there, hooked to machines, Sarah was in the hallway on her phone, begging an insurance rep for an emergency override on his medication. The voice on the other end was robotic. 5 business days for processing, it said. Is there anything else I can help you with? Sarah didn't yell. She didn't cry. She hung up the phone, walked back into that room, and sat beside her child. Her silence said everything. The hospital lights never dim, but Sarah felt like the world had gone dark. Liam was stable, but barely, and that word stable meant nothing without the medication. Insurance wouldn't budge. No one had any samples, and the pharmacy distributor couldn't reship without approval. 5 business days. That might as well have been a lifetime. By the 4th night, Sarah hadn't slept more than an hour. Her body was running on fumes. Her phone stayed at 3% battery, clinging to hope she'd never charged. And then, sometime around 11:30 p.m., she snapped. Not loudly, not violently, just quietly. She opened the Maple Glen neighborhood Facebook group and typed, "I don't usually post here, but I need to say something. Yesterday, the HOA removed a package from my porch. It was sealed, clearly labeled, a temperature-sensitive medical delivery for my son. They threw it away. He's in the hospital now because of it. I just want people to know what happened." She stared at the screen. Her hands trembled over the post button. What if people said she was overreacting? What if they sided with Karen? She clicked anyway, then waited, and the responses didn't trickle in. They flooded. Wait, they did what? That's insane. I'm so sorry. What can we do? Other stories began pouring out like a cracked dam. Neighbors shared violations for things as small as leaving recycling bins out or planting tomatoes. One wrote, "Karen made me repaint my door because the blue wasn't on the approved palette." And suddenly, Sarah saw it. This wasn't just her fight. This was everyone's quiet resentment. Years of walking on eggshells, of swallowing frustrations. And now it was out. One voice, trembling, had spoken the truth, and the neighborhood was listening. Sarah hadn't meant to start anything, but within 24 hours, her post had over 700 comments. People who had never liked, never shared, never spoke. Suddenly they were telling their own stories. Some even apologized. "I voted for Karen last year. I'm so sorry. I had no idea it had gotten this bad." Others didn't just sympathize. They mobilized. "We should call a meeting. There has to be legal action we can take. Would you talk to a reporter?" Sarah didn't know what to say to any of them. She hadn't set out to start a movement. She just wanted to make sure no one else's child ended up in an ICU over a porch rule. But now that the lid was off, it wasn't going back on. People started digging through their own HOA paperwork. Old violations, petty fines, threats over mailbox colors and garden sizes. Sarah's story became a catalyst. Not just a horror story, but a mirror. And in it, people saw how far things had gone. Because while everyone had a story about being fined, hassled, or humiliated by Karen's HOA, they hadn't realized until now what unchecked power could really cost. One neighbor wrote, "A kid almost died over a box, and they still haven't apologized." Another dropped a bomb. A lawyer lived in the neighborhood, and he wanted to help. Sarah hadn't expected any of it. She still wore the same scrubs, the same tired ponytail, the same circles under her eyes. But when she stepped outside now, people waved, nodded. Some crossed the street just to thank her. It didn't erase the fear or fix Liam, but it shifted something. The system that made her feel small, it was showing cracks. And behind those cracks, something was starting to shine through. Sarah Miller never imagined she'd file a lawsuit. She wasn't someone who stirred the pot. But after 4 nights watching her son slip in and out of consciousness, his arm full of IVs and machines breathing for him, something hardened inside her. This wasn't just a mistake. This was negligence. And someone had to answer for it. With the help of that neighbor, an attorney named Martin, Sarah filed a civil suit against the Maple Glen Homeowners Association for gross negligence and emotional distress. She wasn't after a check. She was after accountability. And the neighborhood, they were watching. Local news picked up the Facebook post, then regional media, then a parenting blog with millions of readers. Suddenly, what happened on one suburban porch was sparking conversations in living rooms across the country. At the first court hearing, Sarah sat stone-faced while Karen Watson strolled in like she was headed to a country club brunch, binder full of HOA policies under one arm, her lawyer by her side. They called it an unfortunate misunderstanding. Said the HOA had simply followed protocol. No intent to harm, the attorney claimed smoothly. It was Ms. Miller's responsibility to safeguard sensitive deliveries. Sarah didn't speak. Not yet, but her jaw clenched as the words hit her like cold water. She wasn't looking for a fight, but if they thought she'd back down, they didn't know who they were dealing with. By the second hearing, things changed. Sarah came armed, not with legal jargon, but with truth. She played the ring footage, the courier, the clearly labeled box, the HOA officer, calm as ever, scooping it up without even a knock. And then she stood. "This wasn't a pair of socks," she said softly. "This was my son's medication." And they threw it away like it was trash. The room went silent, and stayed that way. The third hearing wasn't supposed to be any different. The courtroom was the same. Fluorescent lights, quiet shuffle of papers. Karen Watson sitting smug in her navy blazer, flipping through printed policies like they were sacred scripture. But this time, Sarah brought something with her. A dolly, a mini silver fridge. She wheeled it straight into the center of the room, plugged it in without a word. The soft hum filled the silence. The judge blinked. Karen's lawyer raised an eyebrow. And then, from the fridge, Sarah pulled out the box. White, foam, labeled in red. Urgent medical delivery. Refrigerate immediately. Do not tamper. It was identical to the one her HOA had discarded, the one that nearly cost her son his life. "This," she said, gently placing it on top of the fridge, "is what they threw away." No one breathed. This is the exact packaging. Same delivery service. Same temperature requirements. This box keeps my child alive. But they didn't ask. They didn't knock. They didn't even care what was inside. They just removed it, because it didn't match the neighborhood aesthetic. She turned to Karen, who for the first time looked small. You didn't enforce a rule, Sarah said. You made a choice. You decided that your obsession with order was more important than a little boy's life. Karen looked away. Sarah faced the judge. I'm not here for pity. I'm here because someone in a clipboard and a polo shirt got to decide my son's health didn't fit the Maple Glen image, and no one stopped him. The judge, normally unreadable, leaned back, staring at the box like it weighed 100 pounds. In that moment, it wasn't about HOA bylaws anymore. It was about what kind of world we let rules create. And Sarah? She had just turned that world upside down. 1 week later, the courtroom was packed again. But this time, it wasn't tension in the air, it was anticipation. Karen sat stiff beside her lawyer, her blazer perfect but her expression pale. Sarah sat near the front, still and unreadable. No theatrics, no speech, just waiting. Judge Mallister didn't stall. He read the ruling with no fanfare. In the matter of Miller versus Maple Glen Homeowners Association, the court finds in favor of the plaintiff. You could have heard a pin drop. The judgment hit like a wave. $125,000 in damages. Mandatory revision of HOA policy to protect medical deliveries. A formal apology, recorded and made part of the HOA's public record. Karen didn't say a word. She didn't stand. Her attorney barely moved. Then Judge Mallister did something no one expected. He removed his glasses, looked directly at the room. The law, he said, is not a tool for maintaining appearances. It exists to protect people, especially those who can't protect themselves. A child's health will always outweigh a neighborhood's paint palette. And that was it. First a single clap, then more. Applause broke out like thunder rolling through the courtroom. Sarah sat quietly through it all, shoulders finally dropping, eyes glassy but strong. Not triumph, not vengeance, just relief. Karen Watson resigned 2 days later. No statement, no farewell, just an email to the HOA board citing personal reasons. But everyone knew, and the ripple effect? It didn't stop in Maple Glen. Within days, parenting blogs, local papers, and neighborhood forums across the country were buzzing. Other HOAs started rewriting policies. Fast. Arizona, New Jersey, Florida, all changing the way they treated visible deliveries marked medical. All because one mom refused to accept silence. All because Sarah Miller had the courage to say, "This isn't okay." And the world finally listened. Sarah never wanted the spotlight. She didn't do interviews, didn't chase headlines. She stayed home, where she always wanted to be, with Liam. He made a full recovery. Within weeks, he was back to humming at the kitchen table, drawing robots and spaceships with permanent marker stains on his fingers. One afternoon, he sketched their house, and in the corner, he added a tiny white box with a bright red label. Sarah didn't ask what it meant. She just kissed his head and let him draw. His next medication delivery came on a quiet Tuesday. Same courier, same packaging. The man in the blue jacket smiled warmly this time. "Take care of him," he said softly. Sarah nodded, took the box in both hands like it was gold. She didn't set it down, didn't let it sit. She walked straight to the fridge, placed it carefully on the middle shelf, the one Liam called the safe zone. And this time, no one came for it. No fines, no clipboard, no HOA rep with a badge pretending it was just protocol, just silence and safety. A few months later, the newly restructured HOA held its first open meeting. They expected maybe a dozen people, but the room was full. Young couples, retirees, first-time attendees who'd never dared show up before. The board asked Sarah if she'd like to say something. She didn't bring notes, no speech. She just stood there in jeans and a cardigan and told the truth. "This isn't about my son," she said. "It's about remembering what rules are for. They're supposed to protect people, not punish them." And the room, it stood up, not for a victory lap, but for a mother who stood her ground. Because sometimes it doesn't take protests or power or politics to change a system. Sometimes it just takes one voice brave enough to say, "This isn't right," and to say it until the rules finally listen.